By now, we've all heard about AI, artificial intelligence. It can help write papers for students, make a medical diagnosis, use facial recognition, and even manipulate images. So what impact is it having locally? That's coming up next on WNIN Newsmakers. Welcome to WNIN Newsmakers. I'm Jessica Costello, evening news anchor at Eyewitness News. Artificial intelligence promises to make everyone's life easier, but what can AI actually do, and are there any concerns about using it? Miss Christina Groves, a clinical assistant English professor at UE, joins us now to talk all things AI. Thank you so much for being here.
Well, thank you for having me.
Of course. Now, I would like to assume that we've all now heard about AI, right? Mm-hmm. But there are some that probably might not know a lot about it. So let's start off by defining what is artificial intelligence.
That's a really broad statement. The things that we are talking about right now are a lot of the like ChatGPT, mm-hmm. where we're talking about this generative AI. And I think generative is a little bit of a misnomer because it's drawing on everything outside that it views, right, on the internet. So it's pulling from other things to sort of, it looks like it's creating new things. Mm-hmm. But it can very effectively mimic human speech patterns and things like that. So, we're seeing that, again, all over the internet. And that kind of thing, if that helps.
Absolutely, yeah. Okay. So, it's one of those things that could be very interesting to learn about, mm-hmm. or very scary for some if you're listening to what all it's capable of. And now, it's been in the news a lot lately, mm-hmm. but the technology itself isn't new.
No.
But what are some of the things that AI is doing that are new, that maybe that's why it's in the news a little bit more lately?
Yeah, they've released these large models. They sort of had them go out and sniff mm-hmm. the internet and bring that information in, and then they learned, and then they released them to the public is sort of what the new part of it is, in a package that can be used easily by people. So, it just a line, and you can just type a line, and mm-hmm. it will generate things based on what you've typed in. And so it's popping up all over the place, in places that are a little unexpected. I teach freshmen. I have a 17-year-old son. There's a pinned AI at the top of ChatGPT, or at the top of Snapchat. So they all despise it. Mm-hmm. Yeah, they all despise it. And so it's really interesting to see how students react to AI in places they don't want it.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, you brought up ChatGPT, and that one is so interesting to me because when I first heard about it, I, was curious among mm-hmm. many. And if you just ask it to write a workout plan for you or write mm-hmm. a meal plan for you, it will.
It will.
And you just need to give it specifics, and it will, which is so interesting that it's capable of doing that. Mm-hmm. How is it capable of doing that?
Again, it goes out and it looks at all the workout plans it possibly can, and it finds things that are in common about those workout plans, and it's going to put those in that workout plan. So I saw a really interesting YouTube video, where a woman who debunks cooking myths mm-hmm. Asked it to make a cake. And so it went out and it found lots and lots of cake recipes. So she baked the cake that it recommended. Well, she knew looking at it that wasn't going to work.
Okay.
Right? It was just a ton of chocolate. Like it was melt all this chocolate and put it between two kind of cookie layers. Right. Almost. It was almost like that kind of thing. But if you don't know something basic about the thing you're asking, like if you didn't know anything about workouts and you asked it to make you a workout plan and it told you to go run 12 miles, obviously you couldn't do that right away. You know enough to kind of keep it in check.
Right.
So I think that, being literate in the media, as we talk about media literacy a lot, and putting stops on it and going, I don't think I trust this completely. One of the ways that AI learns is through about a 5% margin that it's going to give you wrong information. It wants people to correct it. That's from one of my colleagues who teaches AI. And so if you get that, it may be 95% correct in that workout plan, but it's automatically going to have that 5% margin of error. Like the recipe that I was talking about, it told her to put as a garnish a stick of gum on the top.
Okay, and we know that gum doesn't belong on cakes.
on cakes. Absolutely not.
Well, an interesting part of your profession, you're an English professor,
Yes.
and AI can be a pro or it can be a con in the classroom.
Yes.
I want to go over both, but first, the interesting part that you see all over social media are the cons to this, unfortunately.
Absolutely.
And sometimes students can attempt to use AI for essay writing.
Yes. We are definitely seeing that. It's kind of the Wild West right now because, we have to figure out AI alongside our students.
Right.
And, in writing, one of the things is we want to make sure we kind of AI-proof our assignments. And so we have several ways that we do that. One of them is I have my students use all library resources that are all behind paywalls. So the AI can't go sniff those. It will make up entries, but again, I've been doing this long enough that the entries themselves, I'm like, I don't think that, or I can go look it up easily if it, triggers something in my brain. But some of my colleagues working in graphic design, for example, there's a lot that they're doing with AI. My colleagues in like computer programming, he said that he can do 100 assignments instead of 10 because most of it is done by the AI, but then the students have to go in and figure out where the AI is wrong and fix the code.
And that could be a pro here.
Absolutely.
So I don't want to just say
No.
that it's not always a con, and it's always not always a negative in the classroom, but this emerging technology can be used as a pro in terms of learning.
Absolutely. And it's not going away, so we're all going to have to adapt to the ways that we use it in the classroom. And when I'm giving away my age here, but when I was in college is when Google came out, where the internet before, it was almost impossible to navigate, and then we got Google, and then it was a lot easier to navigate, and that changed the landscape. And digitizing library catalogs and all of that, it made it so that the assignments we had to do were harder than the generation before us, right? And so that's where we're headed, is that we're just gonna have to make the assignments harder.
Yeah. And we just have to evolve as technology evolves, because that's what's happening right now.
Absolutely.
Now, we've talked about some of the ways that AI is being used, but are there ways that you think that people watching this might be surprised that it's being used that we haven't talked about?
Yeah, one of the things that I've been reading about is those little boxes at the top of Google, like it gives you the information, it doesn't take you directly to a web page. Those are starting to be generated by AI. And being aware of that is really important because you need to click on a website and you need to cross-reference the information and make sure that you are, again, being a good steward and being a media literate person as you're moving through this landscape.
Absolutely. All right, well, thank you so much for being with us, Christina.
Thank you for having me.
Here to talk more about the implications of artificial intelligence on intellectual property is Rick Martin, a patent attorney at Martin IP Law Group. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Of course. So for those that don't know, I do want to have you define intellectual property.
So intellectual property is an area of the law that covers primarily the creations of the mind. So it covers patents, trademarks, copyrights, and trade secrets are the four main areas of intellectual property law.
What is AI doing to something that maybe someone else owns in terms of, their creative image or whatever it might be in terms of patents? What is AI? It's almost posing a problem, right?
Yeah, so there's a couple things that really, if you're using AI, and what I'll refer to as generative AI, to generate work product, whether it's a photograph, a piece of art, a book, a blog post, anything like that, it create some issues with regard to intellectual property law. Two things you really have to look at is what you're creating, does that infringe on somebody else's intellectual property? And then the second thing to look at is what you're using the AI to create, is that protectable? Those are really the two main areas or two concerns that you should have with intellectual property law.
Now, when we talk AI, this could be a very new conversation for some, especially for some that are watching here, but you talk about generative AI. What is the difference between, are there a lot of spider webs of AI, or what is generative AI?
So when I refer to generative AI, and that's kind of what the big explosion with AI this year has been, is your Chat GPT, your DALL-E, your programs online that allow you to input information into that system, and it generates whatever you're asking it to generate. So you may be asking it to generate a picture, you may be asking it to generate a story, a blog post, something like that. So you input information, and based on the information that it has scrubbed the internet for, it's going to create what you ask it to create.
And the big question is with that, who owns what is created? Is that difficult to answer?
Yeah, it is, and with the AI, it's really an evolving topic. So with regard to patents and copyrights in particular, to the extent that AI creates something, so if AI creates an invention that is potentially patentable, it's not patentable because AI is not a person, and the patent laws require essentially that it has to be a person. Same with copyright law. The author under copyright law has to be a person. So if AI writes a book, writes a story, writes generates a picture, it's not protectable. Nobody really owns it because there's nothing to own there or nothing to protect from a copyright perspective, because the AI is not a person, and the AI, then it can't be protected under copyright law.
Now, this might be hard to predict, but do you see those laws evolving now that something like AI exists? You keep saying that a person needs to be involved there, but now that AI is there, do you see those laws changing?
They could. I mean, and again, that would have to be something that Congress would have to take under advisement and probably have hearings on and really consider as to whether or not something like that should be protectable. But at least as of right now, I don't see that coming anytime soon. The Copyright Office has issued public statements, as has the Patent Office, on this issue, and pretty well everyone out there is satisfied that, yeah, this shouldn't necessarily be protected.
Right.
You run into some issues where, at least in the copyright area and probably in the patent area too, where if AI generates part of something, but there's obviously always some human input into this. So what is protectable? And that's kind of, maybe where legislation or even the courts are probably going to have to come into play to decide, okay,
Right.
What is protectable? So if I give AI a laundry list of something to create, say a recipe that has these 5 ingredients. So the format or the structure of it overall could be protectable because I had some input into that, but ultimately anything that the AI creates out of that is not protectable.
It'll be interesting to see, as time goes on, how AI evolves and the laws that follow it as well. But, in the meantime, before Congress makes those decisions and whatnot, what safeguards are currently in place for those that are, that have their artwork put out there? Let's use AI-generated images.
Okay.
So for those that maybe are doing that on their own, using some kind of software system, and then an AI-generated image almost mimics something that they created, are there safeguards to protect their work and say, hey, this is mine and this was almost copied?
Yeah, so and that's sort of the same issue. I think we talked early on about the two concerns are, one, is what you have protectable, and then the second question is what AI has created, does that infringe on somebody else's work? And that's answering that question. And from a copyright perspective, yeah, it very well could infringe it. From a copyright perspective, it has to be what's considered transformative of the work in order to not infringe. So, and again, that's a complicated analysis as to what's transformative and what's not. But the closer it looks like something else that's protected, the more likely it is to be infringing. There's also, I think, a number of authors, and there's a couple lawsuits pending right now, where some of these authors of a number of books and novels and things of that nature have alleged that just the mere scouring of the internet for all of this information and taking their book and putting that into the database and using that to train the AI is an infringing act. So we're waiting to kind of see what the courts decide about that.
I'm not asking you to go into any detail by any means, but has this been an issue locally? Have you heard of it being an issue locally for some people?
I haven't seen it locally to a large extent. I do have a local client that gave me a story of someone that they work with. Interesting situation, and maybe another thing with AI is that people that are kind of in the art industry or the theater industry, acting, so on and so forth, should probably pay a little closer attention to contracts they sign. This client of mine mentioned a voice actor that had been presented with a contract for, and I think it was an animated film of some kind, and they wanted to use their voice, and the contract actually specified that they could basically reuse her voice, resample her voice, use it for whatever purpose they wanted. So 10 or 20 years ago, that probably wouldn't have been a big deal, but with the technology available today, essentially she was signing away her rights to her voice to the studio to say, okay, if I sign on for this project, you guys now have enough of my voice that you can plug it into an AI and really just regenerate my voice to say whatever you want it to say, and I've signed away my rights to object to that.
All right, well, thank you so much, Rick, for joining us.
All right, glad to be here. Thank you for having me.
Well, now we're joined by Detective Van Cleve of the Evansville Police Department to talk about how AI is used over at the police departments. Thank you so much for being with us today.
My pleasure.
So this is so interesting because we've been talking about how AI is just now involved with our daily lives, but this is now helping police officers kind of conduct business on their side of things. So what are some ways that EPD is using AI?
With it still being an emerging technology, there's really two tools that we use right now. One would be a facial recognition program, and then another is a license plate reader program.
No, I think people would be interested on those specific instances that it's helped you now. I don't want you to go into too many details here, but can you tell us with a specific instance where you were using AI to catch a criminal, maybe?
Sure. So with the license plate reader, the company that we use is called Flock. We have about 55 Flock cameras. They are a complete game changer in how we do our investigations. I could give you multiple examples of how we use it and how often we use it. If you go into our office, it's going to be open on every person's desktop, as a tool that we're going to be using on most cases. There's one particular case I could mention is for years, detectives have tried to catch out-of-town crews from Texas that come all the way up to Evansville, steal a person's truck, and then they use that large truck to try to pull the ATM off of its base at a bank and then take all the money out of it. Haven't been able to catch them for years and years, but just this year we've caught two, and one was caught within 24 hours down in Louisiana because we were able to use the Flock cameras to identify the suspect car, find the suspect car down in Louisiana, take them into custody, game over.
And we've done a lot of stories, in the news business about Flock cameras, but for some people that might not know while they're watching this what those Flock cameras are, I think they're so interesting. And to be honest, I wasn't sure myself that AI was used within that. So can you explain to the viewers what those Flock cameras are?
Sure.
And if you can, talk about, they're placed in different spots, not only within the city, but maybe on county lines as well, right?
Yes. So license plate readers have been around for years and years. Flock came onto the scene here recently, the past couple of years, and as I understand it, they use AI technology to be able to recognize types of cars that are going through. So if I know that a red passenger car was a suspect vehicle, I could look at cameras in that area and pull up all those red passenger cars, or it was a Ford, or it had a luggage rack on top. And then I can look at the license plate and I can see where that car has been on Evansville cameras, but not just Evansville cameras, it's networked with over 50,000 cameras nationwide.
Wow.
So the capabilities are great. And I know that Warwick County, Vanderbilt County here recently is getting some more. Henderson has them. So it's really exploding right now.
Absolutely. Now, on the flip side of things, though, because AI isn't always a positive, it can also be a negative and help criminals. In what ways does it do that?
Sure. I think right now, the biggest way that we see criminals being able to utilize AI would be in a financial crime standpoint, where scammers are able to deep fake an image or deep fake a voice and be able to convince somebody to do something because they think the voice is genuinely somebody that they know.
So, Detective, are there any local cases that you can talk about how AI has been used?
Sure. AI is still an emerging technology, and criminals are learning how to use it. What we have seen is that there are people who have done a deep fake on a voice, make a phone call and convince the person that their loved one has been arrested and that they need to send money. And it was very convincing. They swore it was their own family member.
Are there, or is there, any advice that you give to people now? Because I've heard online that people are trying to create safe words with their family, and they ask, what's your maiden name to your mom, if it's your mom on the other end and you're hearing your mom's voice, and that person then can't answer that question. Does EPD have any advice for those out there that now that we're experiencing problems like this, how should people be prepared?
Yeah, the advice would be for any time anybody over the phone or over email or messenger is asking you for money or personal information, to do a two-step authentication, if you will, by calling them, if they emailed you, or email them if they called you, or going to their house, but just verifying for sure that it's the person that you're talking to.
Now, what about public safety? Do you think AI has increased public safety and the ability to do so, or caused more problems, or just kind of a mixture of both?
At this point, I think EPD is doing a very good job of utilizing the AI tools available, particularly Flock, have caught countless number of criminals because of it.
Now, are there any, let's talk about the future here. Are there any predictions on how AI can be used in the future in terms of police departments, and have there been talks around that?
I think there are if we have the same conversation 5 years from now, I'll have a list of all kinds of tools that we're using. I'm very excited to see what they are. I think, the future is exciting.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Detective.
Yep.
Thanks to all of our guests for joining us to talk about the use of artificial intelligence. Next week, we'll discuss literacy issues in our area. Thanks again for watching WNIN Newsmakers.